Spirit of the living God, in those places where we are indeed very parched from a full week, we ask for your replenishment. We know that sometimes it comes by way of fire, and turn to those moments of the early church in which we might be energized and pointed towards a direction of your love and your service for our world. Amen and amen. Big sigh out, giving thanks for God's breath as it still is with me. For we know that in days past that so many have died as a result of COVID-19. We know that over 100,000 people in our country alone have succumbed to that virus. In addition, the other virus of racism, and as long has plagued our country and as it has seeped out into this world, has also claimed the lives of those who are so very precious to God. We say the name of George Floyd in particular this week, who was kneed down into the street and murdered and robbed of that breath that was so holy and divine in him. We gathered this week on Zoom on Wonder Wednesday, asking that anyone who would like to sit vigil, remembering him and recognizing the systems that seem to have gotten him there and gotten this country to an ongoing place of lament and injustice. Several of us sat on that Zoom call talking about resources, but also checking in with the feelings of our hearts, those things that we are continually carrying. One thing that came up was that we became aware through a participant's ability to share that just on Tuesday, a day after the death of George Floyd, that there were protesters in Ellicott City right up the road who were donning racist t-shirts directed at our county executive, and they were also bullying for the reopening of community. On that day, a day in which we recognize the pain coming from so many people, so many Black people within community and people of color who feel the ongoing oppression and pressure of our systems of control through white supremacy, that on that day it was appropriate to try to pressure into the economic interests of a largely white interest there as it was represented to our first Black community executive, to do so even as COVID would disproportionately claim people in Black and brown communities. That day, friends, have yearned to feel the energy of Pentecost at work in these places of my own despair, where we might have the lens on Georgia or New York City or Minneapolis, and somehow those are always so horrific, but when we find the embers of it in our backyards, it can still reach a place we didn't know we had, even more tender unto us, the proximity of it. Also, there were complaints about the gathering of the Eid celebration at the conclusion of Ramadan. Our friends at Dar al-Taqwa did a drive-through Eid celebration for families, and people were calling in to complain to authorities about such a disruption and were complaining about the zoning. What a missed opportunity, friends. I found that after learning that, I so long to sit with some of my Muslim brothers and sisters and learn more about the wisdom that they must have gained at the end of Ramadan and what it is like in pandemic to come out of those places in which you are in touch with your body, not having eaten, but only eaten mostly just the spiritual food of your Creator, grabbing a morsel as the sun goes down. Surely they have learned so much, and they are the ones dreaming dreams and having visions about the languages that we might speak in unison. What would I tell my interfaith brothers and sisters if they asked me what Pentecost is all about? On this holy and high day of the church, 50 days past the resurrection at Easter, would I be able to say that we are a resurrection people? That we stand for the fiery flames of revolution that were first activated there in Acts? Could I claim that we are emulating and stoking the fires that were first implanted and erupted externally above the heads of the disciples? Are we the disciples of today? Are we distracted? Are there chaos issues that arrive around division that come out that distract us from those whose voices have been silenced heretofore? Are we privileging what we might gain through greed and advantage at the expense of hearing the whirring and the violent wind that is sweeping through our commonplaces? I wonder as well about the sense of Pentecost. What was it like to be in the room at that moment? I'm going to have some bodily connection to that experience. I think of the odors that we have in our homes as we become so intimate with them in your space. Your own smells and form, but also those of your children. Perhaps the regular burning of toast or the sweeping smell of the honeysuckle on your daily walks. What was it like in that room? Did it smell like wine being spilled? Did it sound like charring of old mentalities? Did it sound like the beauty of a language that was coming into one beat and of one accord, even as it delighted in its multiculturality? Oh, can you imagine it, friends? And what hope might we be able to talk about? Pentecost, to be able to share it with others and believe that it is not just something of old, but that it is erupting within and through us. How we need the fire, friends. How I ache for it this week to be charged up in my bones and lived out through my flesh, that I would be about the anti-racist actions to meet our current establishments, the ones that have oppressed and forced the dominion of uncomfortable language and colonizing language in trails of tears and in the births of slave ships. It's all here, friends, all wrapped up in this time of our own inner and outer disease. How I pray that our Pentecost can be some of the sparking energy. Perhaps it is the sparking energy that we don't always perceive, but is always at work, for there are fires always happening. Sometimes we are too blind to see them, are too turned away in our ignorance, are too willfully blind because it causes us to be uncomfortable. This week, friends, in our discomfort, perhaps now is when we are the closest to Pentecost. We are closest to the empathy needed to enter in with those laborers who were gathered in that room waiting for the Spirit. For those laborers on the run from law enforcement, for those that would, for all accounts, need to be in hiding from the authorities that be, they instead are being burst open and asked to take to the streets. And what was happening in those moments, it could seem like a protest to those who were onlooking and not ready for revolution. For things may have zigzagged and things might have gotten spilled, and as they went into the streets, they seemed alive with a fury of which others might not yet be able to identify. But for those involved and those just starting to get the sense of that spiritual flame, it was starting to feel like justice. It was starting to feel like the drumbeat of the God who was all the way alongside those who'd been in Babylon. It was starting to sound like Shekinah glory. It was starting to sound like each had a valuable voice that not only spoke of what it meant to be of that community and the intimacy of that inner circle, but was starting to speak the languages of that diaspora, of those in other places who might need the liberating, untamed grace of our God to speak freely. Friends, why have we relied so many years past in church to try and argue whether people could have direct communication with God? It isn't just a select few, but here at Pentecost, it is revealed that God can show up in any time, in any place, and anywhere. that we don't need an intermediary because the Spirit is right there working through our breath when we don't feel like we can breathe. It's working through our breaths to speak and bring about resurrection. And so in all the places where people have been robbed of their breath, we would show up not to press upon the answers that we deem correct in this season, no, but to listen to the deep heart's beating of wounded community. And in our lament, in our deep sense of dust cloth and ashes, allow the spiritual flames of those who are starting to beat out new places of justice, for them to be the drum majors of which we, especially we white folk, would fall in line. And in so doing, we are being taught Pentecost by our Black brothers and sisters. We are being shown the way by Asian American friends who are being discriminated against even now. We are being reminded through our Indigenous brothers and sisters who have been deeply connected to this land that has been ripped from them. Yes, friends, Pentecost is erupting with untamed grace. Untamed grace, as theologian Willie James Jennings has called it. And it is just that untamed grace that is needed now. It's needed down the street in Ellicott City. It's needed up the road at Dar el-Taqwa. It's needed in our currently empty building filled with the spirit of the ancestors. They are still speaking in languages that we might learn in order to carry the torch forward for generations to come. And in order to trust that Pentecost isn't over yet and will not be until the full glory and timing of our Creator. But in this moment, friends, when it might be so easy to say we are so tired. We're tired of pandemic. We're tired of the insides of our house or the smells that are here. We're tired of not seeing one another. Trust that the embers of the flames are still going. And there will be countless things for us to do out into the mission places that God calls us forth to. That we continue to gain and need the energy of untamed grace in order to feel the spinning aliveness that will be the church to meet this next season. And you might hear the same themes over and over again. Have hope, friends. Have it now. Have the hope you need. But trust that as Pentecost brought it forth and as new doors open, as someone just came into the room from my family saying, "Where are you?" It's time for me to emerge, friends. Emerge from the despair that I've been carrying for days. Because if I truly believe that nothing need to keep me from communicating with God and nothing need to keep me from the fire alive that is still bursting forth, it's time for me to emerge from my room, to be in worship with you, but then to emerge and see whatever the need was that was coming through the door and ask God to help me meet that need. In a moment, friends, we're going to do the unthinkable. We are going to have a moment of unmuting everyone. I have no idea how this is going to go. I have no idea what it will mean when scattered voices come in a halting fashion on this virtual platform. But whatever it is you choose to say in those brief moments in which we all have that awkward voice, friends, may it sound chaotic. May it charge us forward as we march in the light of God. And may we trust and lift up whatever voices that we have to be joined in the oneness of our spirit. For there is work yet for us to be done. Thanks be to God for God's untamed grace to meet this moment.